Hear what the unjust judge said. And shall God not avenge his own elect, who cry out day and night to him, though he bears long with them? I tell you that he will avenge them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? So this is the parable that I believe is describing the phrase, the patience of the saints. Now we're going to take a look at this parable, and we're going to study it verse by verse to see how it applies, especially to the end time. Let's begin at verse 1. Then he spoke a parable to them that men always ought to pray. Two lessons from this parable. Men always ought to pray and not what? And not lose heart. In other words, they should always pray and they should never give up in their prayer experience in coming to God. And then I want you to notice verse 2. Here's the parable. Saying, there was in a certain city a judge who did not fear God nor regard man. Now the question is, what does the judge in this parable represent? Well, the fact is, folks, that the judge represents God. And you say, now wait a minute, Pastor Bor. It says that this judge did not fear God or regard man. How can he represent God? The way in which this judge represents God is a comparison by way of contrast. In other words, they're not being compared as being equal. They're being compared by contrast. And we'll see this as we study along. We're going to notice in the parable that this widow comes to the judge, and she keeps on coming and coming, and the judge, he delays giving her justice, and finally says, to get her off my back, I'm going to give her what she's asking for. And then, of course, we're going to notice in the parable that the lesson is, if this judge actually answers the pleas of the widow in order to get her off his back, how much more will God answer our pleas, not to get us off his back, but because he loves us? In other words, it's a comparison by way of contrast. They're not equal. They're not the same. God is in some senses the same as the judge, but in the sense of the reason why he answers, God is different. And so there's a comparison by way of contrast. Now, notice Luke chapter 18 and verse 3. So the judge represents God. Now let's notice the widow. It says, now there was a widow in that city. Now the question is, what does the widow represent? The judge is God. What does the widow represent? Well, what does a woman symbolize in Bible prophecy? A woman represents the church. That's right. But is this a woman under ordinary circumstances? No. She's not a common, ordinary married woman. This woman is a what? She's a widow woman. In other words, she is totally destitute of any earthly support. She has lost everything she has, we're going to notice as we study along. In other words, this is a woman, this is the church under extraordinary circumstances. Now, in the book of Revelation, the woman is used as a symbol of the church. And the woman is persecuted by the dragon. In other words, the woman is left destitute. She has to flee. She can't take anything with her. This is the period that is being described in this parable. It is a woman. It represents the church, but it's not the common ordinary church. It's the church that has lost everything that it has, all earthly support. In other words, this woman has been cleaned out by her adversary, and her only hope is found in the intervention of the judge in her behalf.